How was Jesus' command that disciples love one another a new command? This is a question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of John on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to John chapter 13. We're going to be reading from verses 31 to 38. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So John chapter 13, beginning at verse 31. So when he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and glorify him immediately. Little children, I shall be with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, where I am going, you cannot come. So now I say to you, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered him, "Where I am going you cannot follow me now, but you shall follow me afterward." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for your sake." Jesus answered him, "Will you lay down your life for my sake? Most assuredly I say to you, the rooster shall not crow till you have denied me 3 times. Jesus is in the upper room with the disciples. He has eaten his final meal with them, instituted the Lord's Supper, given them the ultimate example of service by washing his disciples' feet, and then identified Judas as his betrayer, even though the other disciples do not recognize it as Judas. When verse 31 says, "So when he had gone out," it is saying that after Judas had left, the events spoken of here took place. Jesus says to the disciples, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him." Throughout John, we kept reading that Jesus' time had not come, and that is his reason for the escape from the hands of the Jews. That now has changed. With Judas now going to get the soldiers that would arrest him, Jesus' time has now come. And that Judas wasn't here to hear those words, I believe, is intentional. For had Judas known that Jesus really would die, perhaps Judas wouldn't have betrayed Jesus in the first place. The glorification of the Son here is not that he would die shamefully, but that through his death the forgiveness of sins would be obtained, and through his faithfulness God the Father would give Jesus a name that is above all names, and that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow. The Father would be glorified by the death of Jesus, since it would be his Son that was given in this loving sacrifice. Now, how would that glorify the Father? Well, not only in that the Son was obedient unto death in his willingness to die, but God would be glorified for being willing to let his Son die. Let's not think that the Father found some sort of sick pleasure from seeing his Son suffer. I'm sure it pained him to see Jesus dying on the cross for sins. But both the Father and the Son knew that this was the only way that sin could be atoned for. The price of sin had to be paid. And so the Father willingly let the Son pay that price. Thus, through that sacrifice, both the Father and the Son were glorified, and the price for sin was paid. But how God would glorify the Son now needed to be explained more fully to the disciples. Jesus has been predicting his death all along, but the disciples didn't understand. Even here, I don't believe they fully grasp it. But the time has now come, and they will have to deal with it. In John 7 and John 8, Jesus had told the Jews that where he was going, they could not come. In that context, I believe Jesus was telling the Jews that Jesus was going to be in heaven, and since they didn't believe in him, they couldn't go to where he was, for only those who believe in Jesus and have their sins forgiven can be in heaven following Jesus' death on the cross. When Jesus tells the disciples the same thing here in John 13, I believe it has a slightly different meaning based on what we'll see in chapter 14. Instead of telling the disciples that they weren't going to be in heaven because of their unbelief, he's telling them that he was going to die and they weren't going to accompany him to that death. He would be raised from the dead and ascend into heaven, and they would not accompany him there either, for they had the task yet ahead on this earth. However, Jesus will go on in chapter 14 to comfort them by telling them that one day they would be with him forever. But because he was leaving, he was going to give them a new commandment, that they love one another as Jesus has loved them. Now, loving one another is not a new commandment, for we've already studied that in Leviticus 19, verse 18, and it was commanded to the Israelites there to love their neighbors as themselves. So how is what Jesus is saying here a new commandment? Because of that ending, as I loved you. Loving one's neighbor, if done simply out of law-keeping, is not really love, but forced. There's no real reason to do so except God said so. However, when we love someone because Christ loved them, we're realizing that if Christ believes that my brother is worthy of being loved by him, then what reason do I have for not loving my brother? And when we see how deep Christ's love is for my brother, I need to realize how deep my love is to be for my brother. So this new commandment here gives us a reason to love our brother. And because Christ loved our brother, it should give us a strong desire to do so too. And so when men and women see how the disciples loved one another, that will be something that they will want to emulate too. In verse 36, Peter goes back to Jesus' earlier statement and asks where Jesus is going. Jesus tells Peter that he cannot follow him where he is going now, but one day Peter would. Jesus is telling Peter that he would one day die for his faith, something we'll delve more into in chapter 21. Peter, being a close disciple of Jesus, responds by asking, why couldn't he follow him now? For he would lay down his life for Jesus. Jesus answers back by essentially saying, really? He goes on to tell Peter that the rooster will not crow until Peter has denied Jesus 3 times. From our studies of the other Gospels, we realize that Jesus is talking about the final rooster crow, as Mark 14:72 makes it clear that the rooster will crow twice, and by that time Peter will have denied Jesus 3 times. Peter was so confident in himself, however, Jesus knew better. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of John chapter 14, verses 1 to 11, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.